Today we're going over world leaders, commanders, and major political figures whose deaths were directly or indirectly tied to the United States. Number 1. Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan ruler whose final escape ended after NATO aircraft struck his convoy. Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya for more than 4 decades, and for most of that time, he was one of the strangest and most unpredictable leaders in the world. He came to power in 1969 after overthrowing the Libyan monarchy, then built a state centered around his own revolutionary image, his personal ideology, his security forces, and his long speeches that could somehow sound like politics, philosophy, and a fever dream all at the same time. To supporters, he was a defiant, anti-Western revolutionary who used Libya's oil wealth to challenge old colonial powers. To enemies, he was a dictator who crushed opposition, sponsored terrorism, tortured dissidents, and turned Libya into his personal kingdom. By 2011, the Arab Spring had reached Libya. Protests became rebellion, rebellion became civil war, and Gaddafi responded with the kind of threats and military force that made Western governments claim civilians were in danger of mass slaughter. The United Nations authorized military action to protect civilians, and NATO began an air campaign against Gaddafi's forces. The United States was not the only power involved, but American intelligence, aircraft, drones, refueling, surveillance, and command support were central to the operation. NATO later confirmed that its aircraft struck armed vehicles in a convoy near Sirte on October 20th, 2011. That convoy mattered because Gaddafi was inside it. By that point, Sirte was one of the last places still holding out for him. Rebel forces were closing in, and Gaddafi tried to flee with loyalists in a group of vehicles. NATO aircraft hit the convoy, destroying vehicles and scattering survivors. Gaddafi was not killed by the airstrike itself, but the strike shattered his escape. Wounded, disoriented, and separated from organized protection, he fled with a small group and ended up hiding in a drainage pipe near the road. His body was taken to Misrata and displayed in a freezer while people lined up to see the dead dictator. The image was both symbolic and disturbing. To many Libyans, it was the end of a brutal ruler. To others, it was the beginning of a new nightmare, because Libya did not become peaceful after Gaddafi's death. The country fractured into militias, rival governments, foreign-backed factions, and years of instability. His death showed how removing a dictator can be easier than building a country after him. Number 2. Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator captured by American forces and executed after the U.S. invasion destroyed his regime. Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq like a man who believed fear was the strongest foundation of government. He came to power through the Ba'ath Party and built a regime filled with secret police, informants, military parades, torture chambers, and portraits of himself staring down from walls across the country. He led Iraq into a devastating war against Iran, invaded Kuwait, used chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians, crushed uprisings, and survived for years under sanctions after the Gulf War. By the early 2000s, he was already one of America's most famous enemies. Then came the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. The official justification focused heavily on weapons of mass destruction, links to terrorism, and the claim that Saddam's regime was a threat that had to be removed. The invasion toppled him quickly. Baghdad fell, statues came down, and Saddam disappeared. For months, American forces searched for him while Iraq slid into chaos. Then, in December 2003, U.S. troops found him near Tikrit, hiding in a small underground space that became known as a spider hole. The former dictator was pulled out with a beard, disheveled hair, and none of the power he had once used to terrify millions. From there, Saddam was held under U.S. military control before being transferred to Iraqi custody for trial. He was tried by an Iraqi tribunal for crimes against humanity connected to the killing of 148 Shiite Muslims from Dhu jail after an assassination attempt against him in 1982. In November 2006, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Britannica notes that Saddam was executed by hanging on December 30th, 2006, after his conviction by the Iraqi tribunal. Technically, Iraqi authorities carried out the execution, but the road to that gallows was created by the U.S. invasion. American forces destroyed his government, captured him, held him, and supported the political order that tried and sentenced him. That is why Saddam's death is often placed in the larger story of U.S. intervention, even though the person who opened the trapdoor was not an American soldier. His final moments were chaotic and controversial. Guards mocked him. A smuggled cell phone recorded the execution. Instead of looking like a clean act of justice, the footage looked like revenge inside a room filled with sectarian tension. For some Iraqis, Saddam's death was justice for decades of brutality. For others, it deepened the feeling that Iraq had been broken open and handed to forces that would tear it apart from the inside. Number 3. Osama bin Laden, the terrorist leader killed by U.S. Navy SEALs inside Pakistan. Osama bin Laden was not a president, king, or prime minister, but he was the leader of al-Qaeda, and after September 11th, 2001, he became the most hunted man on earth. He had been born into wealth in Saudi Arabia, but he turned himself into the face of global jihadist terrorism. His organization carried out attacks against U.S. embassies, the USS Cole, and then the September 11th attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people and changed American history overnight. After 9/11, the United States invaded Afghanistan to destroy al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban government that had sheltered bin Laden. But bin Laden escaped. For years, he became a ghost, appearing in videos and audio recordings, while U.S. intelligence chased rumors across mountains, caves, villages, and safe houses. Every few months, there were reports that he might be dead, hiding, sick, trapped, or already gone. But he stayed alive. The break came through intelligence work focused on couriers. Eventually, U.S. analysts tracked a trusted courier to a large compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The compound was strange. It had high walls, unusual security, no phone lines, and residents who burned trash rather than leaving it outside. Over time, intelligence officials became increasingly convinced that someone extremely important was hiding there. President Barack Obama authorized a raid rather than an airstrike, partly because the U.S. wanted proof. On the night of May 1st in Washington and early May 2nd in Pakistan, U.S. helicopters carried Navy SEALs into Abbottabad for Operation Neptune Spear. The 9/11 Memorial describes the mission as involving helicopters carrying SEALs, an interpreter, and a military dog into the compound. The raid nearly went wrong immediately when one helicopter crash-landed inside the compound because of difficult air conditions. But the team continued. SEALs cleared the buildings floor by floor. They killed several people inside, moved upward, and eventually reached the room where bin Laden was located. According to the official account, he was shot and killed by U.S. forces. The whole operation lasted less than an hour, but it ended a manhunt that had lasted almost 10 years. U.S. forces collected computers, hard drives, documents, and identification evidence. Bin Laden's body was taken away, identified, and buried at sea to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine. Number 4. Isoroku Yamamoto, the Japanese admiral targeted by the U.S. after Pearl Harbor. Isoroku Yamamoto was not the ruler of Japan, but during World War II, he was one of the most important military leaders in the Japanese Empire. He commanded Japan's combined fleet and helped design the attack on Pearl Harbor, the strike that pulled the United States fully into World War II. In American eyes, Yamamoto was not just another enemy officer. He was the architect of the attack that killed thousands of Americans and humiliated the U.S. Pacific Fleet. By 1943, the war in the Pacific had turned into a brutal struggle across islands, jungles, oceans, and airfields. American code breakers were secretly reading parts of Japanese communications, and in April 1943 they intercepted a message containing Yamamoto's travel schedule. It revealed when and where he would fly for an inspection tour. That created a rare opportunity. The United States could target one of Japan's most important commanders in the air, far from the main battlefield. The mission was approved at the highest levels and became known as Operation Vengeance. The operation was specifically planned to intercept and shoot down Yamamoto's plane, and historical summaries describe it as an American military operation to kill him on April 18, 1943. American P-38 Lightning fighters took off from Guadalcanal and flew hundreds of miles at low altitude to avoid detection. The route required careful navigation over open ocean, because the pilots had to arrive at exactly the right place at exactly the right time. If they arrived too early, Japanese forces might notice them. If they arrived too late, Yamamoto would be gone. The timing worked. The American fighters spotted the Japanese planes near Bougainville and attacked. Yamamoto's bomber was hit and crashed into the jungle. Japanese search teams later found his body in the wreckage. He had been killed by gunfire during the attack. The death shocked Japan. Yamamoto was one of its most respected naval minds, and his loss damaged morale. For the United States, the mission was revenge, strategy, and intelligence success all at once. It showed that American forces could use intercepted communications not just to win battles, but to hunt specific enemy leaders. It also raised questions that still follow targeted killings today. Was Yamamoto a legitimate military target? In wartime, most would say yes. He was a uniformed commander traveling through a combat theater. But the mission was still an assassination in practical terms. The United States learned where one man would be and sent fighters to kill him. Operation Vengeance became one of the earliest and clearest examples of the modern targeted killing mindset. Find the leader, track the route, strike at the exact moment, and remove him before he can shape the war further. Number 5. Patrice Lumumba, the Congolese Prime Minister, whose death became one of the darkest Cold War stories connected to U.S. power. Patrice Lumumba became the first Prime Minister of the newly independent Congo in 1960. He was young, fiery, nationalist, and determined to free his country from the control of Belgium and foreign interests. Congo was rich in minerals and strategically important during the Cold War, which meant independence did not bring peace. It brought immediate pressure from outside powers. Lumumba wanted real independence, not a country that changed flags while foreign governments still controlled its wealth. That made him dangerous to Belgium, suspicious to the United States, and attractive to the Soviet Union as someone who might shift Congo away from Western influence. In the Cold War, that was enough to turn a national leader into a target. Within months of independence, Congo fell into crisis. The army mutinied. The mineral-rich province of Katanga seceded with Belgian support. The United Nations became involved. Lumumba appealed for help. And when Western powers did not support him the way he wanted, he turned toward the Soviet Union. Washington viewed that as a nightmare. The CIA explored ways to remove Lumumba, and U.S. documents and later historical work show serious American involvement in plots against him. The State Department's historical records describe planning in Leopoldville to try to implement an assassination operation against Lumumba. Lumumba was eventually removed from power, arrested, beaten, transferred to enemies, and executed in January 1961 by Congolese and Katangan forces with Belgian involvement. The CIA did not fire the bullets that killed him, and historians debate the exact level of responsibility across Belgium, Congolese rivals, the United Nations, and the United States. But even CIA-linked reviews acknowledge that the agency was involved in the political drama around Lumumba, and modern scholarship has described the CIA plot and U.S.-backed efforts to remove him as central to the story. Lumumba's body was destroyed in an attempt to erase evidence and prevent his grave from becoming a symbol. But that failed. His death turned him into a martyr of African independence and a symbol of how Cold War powers treated newly independent nations like chessboards. Number 6. Ngo Dinh Diem, the South Vietnamese president murdered during a coup the United States chose not to stop. Ngo Dinh Diem was president of South Vietnam from 1955 until 1963. For years, he was America's man in Saigon, the anti-communist leader the United States backed as a barrier against North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. Washington gave his government money, weapons, advisors, and diplomatic support because South Vietnam was seen as a frontline state in the Cold War. But Diem was difficult, authoritarian, and increasingly unpopular. He centralized power around himself and his family, especially his brother Ngo Dinh Nhu. His government repressed opponents, alienated Buddhists, and struggled to win broad legitimacy. As protest grew and Buddhist monks publicly burned themselves in protest, the Diem government became a public relations disaster for the United States. American officials began debating whether Diem had become a liability. Some believed the war against communism could not be won while he remained in power. South Vietnamese generals began plotting a coup, and U.S. officials signaled they would not necessarily oppose Diem's removal. The National Security Archive notes that Kennedy was more disposed to support Diem's removal in late 1963 than earlier records had suggested. On November 1, 1963, South Vietnamese generals launched the coup. Diem and his brother fled the presidential palace and hid in a church, but they were captured the next day. Instead of being sent into exile, as some expected, they were killed inside an armored personnel carrier. The United States did not shoot Diem. American soldiers did not drag him from the church or pull the trigger. But the coup happened in a context shaped heavily by U.S. policy, pressure, and signals. Britannica states that Diem was murdered during a coup by some of his generals in 1963. Number 7. Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general killed by an American drone strike in Baghdad. Qasem Soleimani was not Iran's president or supreme leader, but he was one of the most powerful military figures in the Middle East. As commander of the Quds Force, the foreign operations branch of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, he helped shape Iran's influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and beyond. To supporters in Iran and allied groups, he was a hero who fought ISIS and expanded Iranian power. To the United States, he was responsible for attacks, militias, roadside bombs, and networks that killed American troops. By late 2019, U.S.-Iran tensions had grown dangerously high. American officials blamed Iranian-backed militias for attacks in Iraq, including strikes that killed a U.S. contractor and an assault on the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. The Trump administration decided to target Soleimani directly. On January 3, 2020, Soleimani arrived at Baghdad International Airport. He entered a convoy with Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis and others. A U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone fired missiles into the convoy near the airport, killing Soleimani and those traveling with him. The strike was direct, public, and explosive in every sense. This was not a hidden poisoning or a battlefield accident. It was the United States openly killing one of Iran's most important military leaders on Iraqi soil. The legal justification given by the Trump administration was self-defense against imminent threats, but critics questioned whether the threat was truly imminent and whether the strike risked a much larger war. Iran treated Soleimani as a martyr. Huge crowds attended funeral ceremonies. Days later, Iran launched ballistic missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq, injuring more than 100 American service members. For a moment, the region seemed close to open war before both sides stepped back. Soleimani's killing showed how far drone warfare and targeted killing had evolved. The United States did not need a full invasion to eliminate a senior enemy commander. It needed intelligence, surveillance, authorization, and a drone overhead at the right moment. Number 8. Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born militant killed by a U.S. drone without trial. Anwar al-Awlaki was born in New Mexico, which made his case different from almost every other targeted killing on this list. He was an American citizen. He later became a radical preacher, propagandist, and senior figure connected to al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. His English-language sermons and online materials reached audiences in the West, and U.S. officials accused him of inspiring or helping encourage terrorist attacks. By 2011, the Obama administration viewed al-Awlaki as a direct threat. He was in Yemen, far from easy arrest, and officials argued that he was actively involved with a terrorist organization at war with the United States. The administration placed him on a kill list, creating one of the most controversial legal decisions of the drone war era. On September 30th, 2011, a U.S. drone strike hit al-Awlaki's vehicle in Yemen and killed him. Also killed was Samir Khan, another American citizen involved in jihadist propaganda. The strike triggered a major debate because al-Awlaki had not been tried in court. Critics argued that the U.S. government had claimed the power to kill one of its own citizens based on secret executive branch decisions. Supporters argued that citizenship did not protect someone who had joined an enemy force and could not realistically be captured. This case is not the same as killing a foreign dictator or enemy admiral. It is more legally unsettling because it sits at the intersection of terrorism, citizenship, war powers, constitutional rights, and modern drone warfare. Al-Awlaki was not a world leader in the traditional sense, but he was a political and ideological figure with real influence, and his killing showed how the definition of battlefield had expanded after 9/11. The most chilling part came 2 weeks later when al-Awlaki's teenage son, also an American citizen, was killed in a separate U.S. drone strike. Officials said he was not the intended target, but the incident deepened criticism of the drone program. Al-Awlaki's death became one of the clearest examples of a new era where the United States could target individuals far from declared battlefields, sometimes based on secret evidence, and kill them without trial. For supporters, that was necessary counterterrorism. For critics, it was a dangerous precedent. Number 9. Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden, killed in a U.S. counterterrorism operation. Hamza bin Laden was the son of Osama bin Laden, and for al-Qaeda, that name carried enormous symbolic power. After Osama was killed in 2011, Hamza began appearing in messages calling for attacks against the United States and its allies. He was young, connected to the most famous terrorist family in the world, and seen by U.S. intelligence as a potential future leader who could help al-Qaeda rebuild its image. In 2019, the U.S. government confirmed that Hamza had been killed in a counterterrorism operation. Details remained limited. Officials did not reveal a full public account of where, when, or exactly how he died, though reports placed the operation somewhere in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. The secrecy itself said something about the kind of war being fought. Not every killing came with dramatic footage, public raids, or presidential speeches full of details. Some happened in the shadows and were confirmed later with only a few sentences. Hamza was not a head of state, but he was part of the leadership structure of a terrorist organization the United States had been fighting for nearly 2 decades. His death showed that the bin Laden name still mattered enough for Washington to track and eliminate him before he could become a larger figure. By the time Hamza died, al-Qaeda was weaker than it had been at its peak, but the United States was still hunting its leaders across borders. His killing was part of the long tail of the war that began after 9/11, a war where the targets were not just governments, but networks, families, propagandists, commanders, and successors. The death of Hamza bin Laden did not have the same global shock as his father's killing, but symbolically it closed another chapter. The United States had killed the father who built al-Qaeda, and later killed the son who might have helped carry the name into a new generation. Taken together, these stories show that killed by the U.S. can mean many different things. Sometimes it means an American commando firing the shot. Sometimes it means a drone strike. Sometimes it means a NATO air campaign that makes capture possible. Sometimes it means a US-backed coup or a political process created by invasion. But in each case, the United States played a major role in the death or removal of a powerful figure. The bigger question is not just whether these men deserved their fate, because many were responsible for enormous violence themselves. The bigger question is what happens afterward, because history shows that killing a leader can end a life in seconds, but the consequences can last for generations.